Your dog walks up to you and begins licking your hand or your face in a way that feels familiar, and most people immediately interpret this as affection because it looks gentle and consistent, yet what is happening in that moment is far more layered than a simple emotional gesture. That behavior does not begin with you as the owner but originates from early survival patterns where puppies use licking to signal need independence, and although the environment changes as they grow, the behavior itself does not disappear but instead evolves into something more complex. So when your dog licks you, it is not automatically expressing love in the human sense but communicating within a system built on instinct, context, and response, which means the meaning shifts depending on what is happening around them. And this is exactly where most owners misread the behavior, because what looks like affection can actually be communication, evaluation, or even self-regulation depending on the moment. Sometimes the licking happens the second you return home, where your dog approaches quickly and makes contact without hesitation, and this is often labeled as excitement or emotional attachment because of the energy in the moment, but there is another layer running underneath that most people never consider. The dog is not just expressing that it is happy to see you, it is also re-establishing connection while assessing your presence, your state, and your responsiveness in real time, which means the behavior is both expressive and analytical at the same time. Licking in this context becomes a way to reconnect while also confirming stability, which allows the dog to understand where it stands in relation to you after separation. So what feels like pure affection is actually a mix of connection, evaluation, and reinforcement happening simultaneously. Now compare that to moments where your dog licks you slowly while you are calm and sitting still, where there is no sudden excitement or high energy but instead a steady, repetitive action that feels almost soothing. This version of licking is often interpreted with deeper affection because of its calm nature, yet in many cases the dog is using the behavior as a way to regulate its own internal state while maintaining physical contact with you. In other words, you are part of the dog's calming process rather than simply the target of affection, which changes the meaning of the interaction entirely. The behavior becomes less about expressing love and more about stabilizing emotion through proximity and repetition. There are also situations where licking appears after tension, correction, or uncertainty, where the behavior becomes slightly more cautious and less intense but still present in a subtle way. In these moments, licking often functions as an appeasement signal, where the dog is attempting to reduce tension and avoid escalation rather than express affection. It is a way of maintaining balance within the interaction while signaling that it does not want conflict to continue. And once you recognize this, you begin to see that the same behavior can carry completely different meanings depending on timing and emotional context. This is why grouping all licking into a single category creates misunderstanding, because the behavior itself is not fixed but fluid and adaptive depending on what the dog is experiencing. A dog licking you after you arrive home is not the same as a dog licking you after being corrected, even though the action looks nearly identical on the surface. Without understanding the difference, most owners respond the same way every time, which reinforces the behavior without addressing its underlying purpose. And over time, this can blur communication rather than clarify it. When every instance of licking is treated as affection, the dog begins to learn that the behavior consistently produces a positive response, regardless of its original intention. This turns a flexible communication tool into a repeated habit, where the dog relies on licking as a default response across multiple situations. Not because it is always expressing love, but because it has learned that this behavior works in gaining attention and interaction. And this is where the original meaning of the behavior starts to shift. There is also a deeper sensory layer involved that most people never consider, because dogs experience the world differently through scent and taste. Your skin carries information such as salt, sweat, and environmental traces that your dog can process instantly, and licking allows them to gather that information more directly than smell alone. So in some cases, the behavior is not emotional at all but informational, where the dog is simply interpreting data about you and its environment. And again, this adds another layer to a behavior that is often oversimplified. Once you begin to observe the timing, intensity, and context of the licking, patterns start to emerge that were previously invisible. You notice when the behavior is quick and energetic versus slow and repetitive, and you begin to understand what the dog is responding to in each moment. This awareness changes how you interpret the behavior and how you respond to it over time. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to respond with intention. And that shift creates clarity for both you and your dog, because your responses become more aligned with what the behavior actually represents rather than what it appears to be. The dog no longer relies on one behavior to communicate multiple states, because your reactions begin to guide more precise communication. This reduces confusion and strengthens the interaction in subtle but meaningful ways. And over time, the relationship becomes more stable and easier to read. What once looked like a simple sign of affection becomes a complex form of communication that changes with context, emotion, and experience. A single behavior that can express connection, regulation, appeasement, or even curiosity depending on the moment. And once you start seeing those differences, you can't go back to the original assumption. Because the next time your dog licks you, you will pause just long enough to recognize what is really happening beneath the surface.